So I'm pleased to introduce you Simon Rohrer, leading expert of modern enterprise architecture in finance services. Simon Rohrer is the head of enterprise technology architecture and ways of working at Saxo Bank. He has spent his career advocating for modern ways of working. He has had hands-on software engineering roles. He has worked as an agile coach, focusing on technical excellence. He has served in senior position in enterprise architecture and strategy. Now I would like to hand the floor over to Simon Rohrer.
Thank you so much. Thanks, folks, and thanks for coming to me, because there are so many good sessions on right now that I should probably be seeing myself. Thank you. So I'm going to talk about us at Saxo Bank. We are, well, we say we are a global multi-asset facilitator. Effectively, we have a trading platform, similar to sort of Robinhood, Interactive Brokers, that kind of thing. We have $120 billion of assets under management. That's a fairly big number, 1.2 million clients. Interestingly for us, we are both a B2C and a B2B business. So we offer our trading platform direct to clients, typically on an app or on a whole bunch of trading screens. And we offer APIs to other businesses who want that capability for their clients as well. We have a 30-year-old tech stack. Unlike some other banks, we are lucky not to have mainframes to deal with. I'm really happy about that. But 30 years old, you can imagine there's a fair bit of tech debt going on there. We're mainly a C#, a Microsoft Sharp, although some of our newer stuff is in Python and some of our more niche stuff is in C++. Roughly 1,200 configuration items, for those of you, anyone who know what a configuration item is? Anybody working with ServiceNow, that kind of thing? Hello? Not that many of you. Basically, the sort of lowest level distributed components, service, microservice, shared database, that kind of thing. 1,200 of them. But that's only for one customer-facing product. So this thing is pretty complex. We, as of about 2.5 years ago, organized around value streams, what we call client journeys. We have 10 high-level client journeys, 10 high-level value streams. Overall, as an organization, there's about 2,500 of us, and that's about 900 people in tech. So for me, in my career, this is relatively small. For some of you, this might be huge. I used to work for a much bigger bank in the UK where there were about 50,000 people. So it's a bit of a step down in scale, but it's a really nice scale to work with. A bit about where we are as an industry and how did we get here, starting with me. Well, I started 30 years ago as a software developer. I graduated what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be an architect when I grow up. Well, I got there. I was a chief architect at Barclays Wealth in London. And then I took a bit of a shift left, to be a ways of working lead, working with John Smart, and some other colleagues when we did what was originally an agile transformation. Then we realized transformations were not necessarily a thing we wanted to do, and it wasn't just about agile, it was about a whole bunch of ways of working. So ways of working lead. And then Brexit happened in the UK, so I decided to make a Brexit exit. And now I live in Copenhagen, and that's how I ended up here. Record scratch. Now I am head of tech architecture and ways of working at Saxo Bank. I was also really proud to be asked to author a chapter of the IT Revolution Press book, Sooner, Safer, Happier. Where are we as an industry? So a paradigm shift happened over the last sort of 25-ish years. This is how we used to do software development in silos. We used to spend several months planning, several months coding. If we were lucky, several months, possibly squeezed to weeks or days testing. We'd hand something over to a different team who would spend some time working out how to release it, and then throw it over the wall to some other team who would operate it forever. A whole bunch of techniques, technologies helped us move away from that. And now we're able, the best of us, to have a release pattern that happens from plan to actual working software from concept to cash in days or maybe even hours. We don't necessarily even need AI for that. And now we can have teams where the entire team is responsible for both developing and operating the software and going around this loop and iterating time after time. But complexity in the legacy landscape started to dominate the pace of change. Great, we have the techniques and the technologies that allow us to go around that loop. But a lot of the things we do, certainly in financial services, and I'm certain everywhere else, or in many other places, start to dominate the pace of change. And we have this spider's web of dependencies. And this is just a tiny diagram by a guy called Roger Sessions, who I'll talk a little bit about. Roger Sessions, back in the 2000s, started to document his patterns to manage complexity, simple architectures for complex enterprises. He called them, they had this sort of microservices before microservices pattern. He originally called it a fortress architecture, then a snowman architecture, because this picture looks a little bit like this picture looks nothing like a snowman at all, which is why he moved on to call it an autonomous business capability, ABC. It's a microservice before microservices. And what Roger Sessions says is, an organization that lacks a viable programming enterprise architecture will pay a severe cost in IT complexity, that complexity is the enemy, and that enterprise architecture is the only solution. He was an enterprise architect then. He's now retired. He runs a meditation community in Mexico now. Maybe that's a lesson for all of us. So I talk about modern enterprise architecture. What do I mean by modern enterprise? I mean 5 things. Teams of teams of teams. So pretty much over about 150 employees. That number is sort of important. You interact with your customers digitally. Change is the only constant. You've got a pretty heterogeneous environment. You've got stuff that's old and new. You've got stuff that's big and small, slow and fast, paces of change. You have monoliths. You have distributed systems, and some of your stuff comes from vendors, and some of it is built yourself. And probably most importantly, you have systems of systems of systems. This stuff is really similar to Vlad Kononov's talk this morning, for those who saw that, which was absolutely blow away good. So modern enterprise architecture, interacting in that space, I simplify to an ABCDE. Alignment, aligning value and people and technology, better value, sooner, safer, happier, architecting for outcomes rather than outputs or anything else. Continuous governance. So architecture governance is important, but it's much harder in a DevOps wheel environment. DevOps at enterprise scale, not just within teams. And evolution of enterprise architecture and organization over time. Start with the A. Conway's law, very roughly, probably even so rough it's wrong, but roughly, organization architecture drives system architecture. Ruth Malan, who is amazing, puts this really well. If the architecture of the system and the architecture of the organization are at odds, it's going to be the organization architecture that wins. But another quote from Alan Kelly, where all hell breaks loose is when management try to reorganize things. And if you try and change the organization, the software won't let it happen. So then the system architecture is driving the organization. What's going on there? Well, there's some kind of actually a feedback loop. The initial organization is where Conway's law comes in. And that drives your initial, or puts some constraints on your initial system architecture. But then you're very rarely on a blank sheet of paper these days. You're normally in the middle of things. And so there is a feedback loop where your system architecture is constraining how you want to reorganize, and your organization architecture is constraining how you want to re-architect. And what Ruth also says is system architects and business organization architects, who we often call managers, should not work as if their work has no impact on the others. So really what you want to work on is getting these together, but also you've got this business architecture, which again these days we're calling value streams, and that is also driving the organization architecture. Lots of people like us reorganizing into value streams. So actually you've got these 3 points of the triangle that are all constraining each other, and when you try and sort of move around them, unless you're conscious of all 3 points of the triangle, you're probably going to get some issues. So what we want is to be able to align all 3 for sustainable flow, to align value, and organization and the technology and processes that those organizations build and maintain. So we've got this sort of ideal two-pizza. Who knows about two-pizza teams? Two-pizza teams. Amazon say that the ideal size of a team is one that you can feed with 2 pizzas. As Martin Fowler points out, those are American pizzas, so they're pretty huge, but it's still roughly the ideal size of a team. Less than about 20 people, very debatable, won't deep dive into the number there, but that sort of size team. But that team is full stack, full life cycle, what Martin Fowler calls the full burrito. They're T-shaped people, they're people who can test and analyze and develop and operate. You build it, you run it, and to a degree they are self-organizing, ideally. And again, the Team Topologies guys talking about software that fits inside the team's head. Dan North, who's over there somewhere, talks about software that fits in your head, that the size of classes and the size of methods should be something that you can keep inside your head. And Matthew and Manuel extend that to the scope of a team, the software that they own should fit inside the team's head, should be domain-driven, ideally, eventually consistent, independently deployable, and it's not really about monolith versus microservices. There's a great presentation from DevOps Enterprise Summit 2018, I think, about monolith versus microservices missing the point. Emergent design, and it has to be evolutionary architecture because it's going to evolve going around that loop. But no piece of software is an island. An advert for Vlad's book here. Every piece of software has some degree of coupling, however loose it is. And the same is true of teams. So typically what you have, ideally, is a team of teams. That team of teams owns a nested. Zoom out. What's the value of the team of teams that's looking after your payments system? And that team of teams should have a number that's roughly less than 150. Again, I'm not going to deep dive the Dunbar number, I don't have time. Again, a system of systems and a domain that fits inside that team of teams. They need to understand the domain really pretty well. Nested domain-driven design, because domains can be nested. A shared data model, again, eventually consistent. And each component needs to be independently deployable and testable, again, ideally. And then you zoom out again. And this is where we as an organization are. This is your business line. This is the team of teams. In larger organizations, this might just be a department. But again, it's a set of value. There's some coherence. Why is your organization or your department a department? Because it is delivering something of unique value. And then there's a system of systems there. Does this fit in anyone's head at all? Does it fit in my head because I'm sitting at this level? It doesn't. What fits in my head is actually the organization, and I know who to talk to if I do want to know about bits of that system. And to a degree, it's further nested domain. The domain for Saxo is trading. What do we look like? We have, like I said, 900 technologists. That dissolves into about 89 tech teams. 55 of them are aligned to value streams directly, so they are Team Topology stream-aligned teams, roughly. 34 of them are roughly platform teams, some of them enabling teams, or a bit of that. Back to Conway, actually quoting Conway here. So Conway says, basic thesis is that organizations are constrained to produce designs which copies of the communication structures of those organizations, but the design which occurs first is almost never the best possible. You need to reward design managers for keeping their organizations lean and flexible. And your organization is going to be fractal. Again, anything of complexity. Vlad talked about fractal software before, but organizations are also fractal. Some of this is cybernetics. I think Dave Snowden has left. He doesn't like cybernetics applied to human systems, but I do. And this is from Stafford Beer from the 1960s, but Patrick Hoverstadt, just a few years ago, wrote an awesome book called The Fractal Organization on this. And we have a modular and fractal organization. At Saxo Bank, we have those value streams, we have those teams, those 89 teams I just talked about, that own individual elements of that tech stack and steward them over time. So we have that definition of value in the value streams, we have our organization, we know what our technology and processes look like. B is about architecting for outcomes, better, value, sooner, safer, happier. This is what the book that I co-wrote is all about. What does that mean? It means instead of looking for outputs or sort of interim outcomes and saying that your architecture principles are about going to cloud or Kubernetes or reducing duplication, that's not what we're looking for. These are the business outcomes, and your architecture should be aligning to the business outcomes. So we say architect for quality, better is about quality, sooner is about flow, and I'll talk a bit more about architecting for flow. Safer is agile, not fragile. It's looking after security, privacy, minimum viable compliance. I work in a very highly regulated industry, but ultimately everybody's got to look after some degree of safety for their software. And it's about happier, not just happier customers, they're important, but also happier colleagues, citizens, and climate. And finally, it's about value, which is the thing that makes you as an organization. I don't know what your value is. And then a quote from Winston Churchill. I am British, for those of you who didn't notice already. And in the middle of the Second World War, after the Houses of Parliament in the UK were bombed, Churchill was offered to have them sort of rebuilt in a more European style, in a semicircle, instead of the opposing benches. And Churchill said, no, I like the opposing benches, I like the fight and the sort of ability to look one another in the eye when you're opposition. He said, we shape our buildings, but thereafter they shape us. Gene Kim has taken that quote and talked about architecture. We shape our architecture, and then our architecture shapes us. The systems we build become larger, the coordination increases, and then we end up spending all of our time coordinating instead of adding value. This is, I guess, really, really struck home with me. Even systems like Hello World can be built like this. So this is a pattern I've seen in so many places. A team that owns the UI, a different team that owns the API layer, a team again that owns some business logic, and another team that owns some more tightly coupled business logic, and then another team looking after the database. And then you've got to have a bunch of solution architects that then orchestrate them. So even an idea like Hello World goes to the solution architect. Solution architects say, where does that go? Well, hello goes to the greeting service. World goes to the planet service. You've got a /API on there. You've got some Chrome, the quotes, and the exclamation mark. And then the database team have a weird naming convention, so you're only allowed 2 letters for your database. So it's T_HW. Who knows what that means? And then the testing team come out with something that looks close enough. It's not a showstopper defect that it's missing a letter or 2, it's fine. And then go to the cache. So concept for cache took quite a while there. And Gregor, who is a real hero of mine, Gregor is awesome, wrote an article a few years back saying, look, layering is sometimes considered harmful. It's not necessarily that great to have a layered architecture. And when you have a layered architecture, you're going to need a release train one way or another. It might be hidden behind some feature flags, but ultimately, all of those things need to be working. So what do? You restructure. I'm told that refactoring shouldn't be used in that sense, but you restructure the organization and the architecture. So you give one full stack, full burrito team the ability to own a micro front end, a microservice, and a microservice DB. That's great. And then you have an idea, and the team can build it and run it. And your concept to cache gets a lot quicker. What does that mean for the bottom line? Well, Scott Pruitt did an awesome, again, DevOps Enterprise presentation a few years back called Accounting versus Physics, and runs the numbers on this and says removing sort of just one dependency from your stack can save you 4 times in terms of the amount of handoffs, and does some real accounting on the absolute change to the bottom line there. What do we have? Oh, we said 55 aligned teams, 55 stream-aligned teams. Some of those are now full stack. This is quite hard for our stack, and the modern tech stack doesn't help make this any easier. Getting .NET teams who are also awesome at React It's quite hard. There's some that are work in progress as well. But it's part of our tech strategy. The tech strategy that I co-write goes to our board of directors, and we say, look, this is where we want to go. We have your support for that. C is about governance, architectural governance. An HBR article about complexity. Remember, complexity is the enemy. The HBR article is not about software, it's more generic than that, but it says creating and reducing complexity might sound like perfect opposites. They're not. They're asymmetrical. Introducing complexity is cheap. Often, most of the time, removing that complexity that you've added is considerably more expensive. So you want to avoid introducing the complexity in the first place. Is architecture governance the thing that's going to rescue you there? Well, there's an anti-pattern here. Sooner Safer Happier is a book all about anti-patterns and patterns. There's a real anti-pattern here about architecture review boards, which lots of enterprise architects like. But we used to govern architecture in a sort of waterfall or this hybrid mode where we'd have these project phases, initiate, plan, execute, close, and the similar waterfall software phases of analysis, design, build and test, and release. Great. We could slot an architecture board at the end of the analysis phase. They could review some high-level artifacts. We'd have a design to rubber stamp. Great. Nice rubber stamp. Cool. But now we move on to something that looks very different in an agile or lean project where you have a short initiation phase, but then you're doing continuous planning and continuous execution. Eventually you'll close. Your analysis goes on throughout the project. You iterate. You start some analysis up front, but then you continue as you're doing test, design, and build cycles. Most importantly, you're releasing early and often. So where does the architecture board come in there? Well, maybe they've got something early to look at after the initiate phase, but that doesn't really tell you what's going to go into production, because that is going to evolve. So where do they sit in this? Well, I don't think they can. And that's just for a project mode. If you've gone into full product mode, where you're going around and you're evolving the system for years, there's not really a place, because there's not really a single artifact that you can pin down and rubber stamp there. So the pattern that we've implemented at Saxo is black box architecture governance. What does that mean? Well, we govern actually realized or about to be realized architectures, not paper. I think I need a new service. Well, a new service, great. You might need that to implement your value. But that adds complexity to the landscape. So great, come have a conversation with us. We will approve that new service. Or we'll say, you know what, this is just really a small addition to that existing service that you're already running. The same is true, remember that spider's web. Same is true of connectivity between services. So great, I think my service needs to access data. Cool, we will approve that too. I want an exception to automated governance, so typically we expect asynchronous connections between these autonomous business capabilities, but obviously there are reasons to do things synchronously. Again, this is fine. How do we do that? Are we a bottleneck? Do we run a process every 2 weeks where you bring your decisions? No. We run this GitOps. This is pull requests. You want a new service, you submit a pull request to the service catalog. And then we'll look at that. And if we need to have a conversation, we will reach out to you on Teams and say, hey, this looks a little weird. What's this all about? If not, boom, straight away. Same with the connectivity between services. If you want to access a gRPC or a REST endpoint or a Kafka topic, pull request, looks good, fine, doesn't look so good, Teams conversation, quick, easy. As well as that, automated governance and compliance. Again, we're in a regulated industry. So Charlie Betts, who now works for Forrester, awesome, writes a lot about enterprise architecture and says, look, enterprise architecture was often too high-handed and bureaucratic to support rapid innovation. But in a properly executed platform strategy, those checks that enterprise architecture used to do and your security department, they've happened already. They've happened at the platform level. So that checklist you used to have to go through, either in your design review or your go-live review, that's way shrunk down. And this is a two-way street. The architects don't stand in the way of progress, but you folks who are business software developers, you've got to accept a degree of standardization that you can play in. But really, these are enabling constraints. We have a lot of constraints from the European Union as a bank. The Digital Operational Resilience Act came into force in January. A lot of stuff for us to do, but we are baking as much as possible into our platform. We have to write these Word documents that are our processes, but what we've implemented and what we've worked really closely with security and the owners of our DevOps platforms and our pipelines is to just bake as much as possible of that actual genuine compliance to regulation into pipelines. And so developers don't need to think about it until their pipeline fails, at which point it will tell them what to fix. D is DevOps at enterprise scale. As we said, we do continuous conversational governance. And that requires a small architecture center of excellence, working with distributed architects out in the teams, a community of practice, and also working over the long term in an enterprise scope with some of our really important partners who are service management, security, and our site reliability engineers, who are also the people operating at enterprise scale, who, again, back to the A word, we align them to all be pulling in the same direction. And what does DevOps mean to us? Well, the old world where your developer only cared about the top left quadrant of application build, someone else would support it, someone else would run the infrastructure. The initial sort of naive one was to throw the developer in at the deep end and have them work in all the quadrants and have to know really full stack, sort of deep down into Kubernetes and storage. Platform engineering has reduced that cognitive load massively. Most developers don't care, shouldn't care. So now what we have are platform developers who know most of the infrastructure. Developers need to know a little. They need to go below the line just a bit. E is about curating evolution of, as I've said from the start, both the enterprise architecture and the organization. Neil was talking yesterday about evolutionary architectures, about Arc Unit. There's a fabulous ThoughtWorks podcast where they talk about applying fitness functions to distributed systems. A lot of that is sort of quite theoretical, but actually really, really inspiring. In Sooner, Safer, Happier, we talk about evolution in a slightly different way. We talk about, well, actually, real evolutionary theory used to have two opposing theories. The theory that sort of animals and life and organisms evolved over a sort of straight line gradually. Then there's this opposing theory that said, no, everything stayed the same for a really long time. And then something happened, like an asteroid hitting the Earth, and that equilibrium was punctuated, and that's the theory of punctuated equilibrium, that massive sort of change, and then another period of no change. It turns out that actually both theories are right, and that punctuated gradualism is how life actually evolves. And we encourage this to apply to long-lived enterprise systems as well. The continuous evolution, the continuous improvement is continuously paying down technical debt. So it's that theory that 20% of your spend on technology should go into improvement. It shouldn't go into new features. It should just be almost permanently available to improve things, to pay down tech debt, but also to look forward, to take on new techniques and technologies and ways to optimize your pipelines. That's continuous funding. But that's not going to get you everywhere if you've got a system that lives for 30 years. Occasionally, you're going to need that step change. You're going to need that punctuated equilibrium. And then you really do need a business case to say, great, this bit of the system, it's way too slow to change, or it just can't meet regulations anymore. We need to have a massive step change and rewrite or buy or actually just outsource this. There's no point in us building this element of the system anymore at all. So both of those things need to happen if you're going to sustain your system or system of systems or system of system of systems over, like I said, 30 plus years. Nick, of course, is not a fan of the strangler pig pattern, but it is something that we have been using. So at Saxo, when we started this journey about 5 years ago, our landscape looked a lot like Roger Sessions' Spiderweb. It still looks a lot like Roger Sessions' Spiderweb. It's going to be a long, long journey, but we've modernized and componentized and made into autonomous business capabilities about 30% of our services. But at the same time, we've upskilled the teams. We've changed our delivery pipelines. Our DORA metrics are way up there for a whole bunch of those teams. We can get from concept to cash, or at least from check-in to production within an hour for our most important systems. We can deliver 10 times a day. We have automated change advisory boards. The stuff that was slowing us down is no longer slowing us down. So it is the ways of working and the architecture that we've been working on modernizing. So back to that modern enterprise architecture, what do we want to do? We want to align value and people and technology and take some responsibility as architects to understand all three. Rather than these sort of bilateral agreements, we want to architect for outcomes, for business outcomes, for better value sooner, safer, and happier, rather than these old architecture outcomes of deduplication or standardization, just cost reduction. We want to do continuous conversational governance rather than assuming the world is phase-gated. The world is not phase-gated anymore. We want to do DevOps at enterprise scale rather than what a lot of architecture functions do, which is think that we are just involved in the change side. That's no longer the case. We've got to look at both sides of the world, and we want to have evolutionary enterprise architecture rather than just letting entropy set in and not investing in the existing systems and assuming some big new 2.0 or 3.0 or 4.0 program will come and save us eventually. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Simon.
Thank you.
So now we can jump to the questions.
Do we have any questions?
We will see. I don't have, not questions, just at the moment it's frozen. Any questions from here? I can drop the mic, just it doesn't work now, my Slido. Anyone wants to? Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. So my question is that according to my experience, what do you think that an EA team, that the place of an EA team in the company hierarchy, how influences the effectiveness of the team? So where should you place it? Where would you place it?
It's okay, I have that. Where should we? So let me try and answer that. It genuinely depends. It depends on how the rest of your organization goes, honestly. And it's not necessarily where you place, it's more what the mandate is. So we're placed sort of somewhere to the side of the organization, but we have a strong mandate all the way from the top of the organization. I talk about Gregor. Hopefully I didn't mention Gregor's architect elevator, but for those who don't know Gregor's metaphor of the architect elevator, it is my absolute favorite. So we as a enterprise architecture function do get to ride the entire architect elevator. Last week but one, I was standing in front of the board of directors talking about our resilience strategy and getting sign-off for that. The next half hour I might be coaching some teams. So I think it isn't necessarily so important where the function sits, provided the mandate and the influence and the ability to ride the elevator from top to bottom is there. Does that make sense?
Sure, just as I thought.
Thank you. I was really interested about the notion of using Git as a way to have conversations with architects.
Yeah.
So the implication being, before asking if I can do something, I kind of do it and send you a pull request, and then you get to say no. I could imagine that changes, or I'm sure you wouldn't say no, Simon, but doesn't that, though, kind of make it even more difficult? Does that then, is it really about changing the point at which you do say no, because they've already done the work? So you have to be really convinced what they're doing is a bad idea?
They haven't necessarily done the work.
Right.
I mean, and this is where the conversation changes. Well, you want a new service, you know to come and talk to us
Yep.
really early about this. Because, I mean, yes, if you've done the work, we don't want to cause waste at all. Of course not. So we need to coach the organization about those sort of conversations. And typically,
I'm thinking of a situation where I've made a dependency on a new service.
yeah,
So I've gone in and I've started consuming events from a service that I wasn't previously consuming. I see that pull request go in. Do I tag you in to come check that I've done that properly? Or?
Yeah.
Right.
yeah.
So I have to know to do that.
You have to, you can't do it anyway.
Okay.
So to get on the Kafka access control list,
Gotcha.
yeah,
Understood. Right.
yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay.
Hey, I would love to get more information on the line about developers knowing about the platform. I see there's a lot of different opinions about that, and some people might interpret that small line differently. So
Yes.
from a typical developer's perspective, like what do they see of the underlying infrastructure?
Right now, too much is the answer. I think it's continuously evolving.
What's your like ideal vision of how much a developer should see of the underlying infrastructure? We can discuss later if it's...
We can discuss later. It's a superb question, Nick. As little as possible, but not nothing, I think, is the answer, is the TLDR answer. But how that unpacks is to a lot. Right, genuinely, right now, I've seen developers needing to know about these insane patterns in Nginx for stopping URLs for the pre-stop hooks, and developers should not need to know that. So it's sort of like that definition of pornography. You know it when you see it.
I don't know about that
You don't know about
definition.
that at all, I'm sure.
Thank you. We have another question, just for those who are online.
If you're using ServiceNow, you are in a place where governance is very important, and in your industry, governance and legal requirements are extremely important. So in your model, where you have created a GitOps-based thing, where does ServiceNow and the ServiceNow-based regulation come in? So how did you automate the required evidencing, and how you provide high quality evidencing for regulatory compliance thing?
It's a super interesting question, and one day I need to do a much deeper dive talk on that. But we do still use ServiceNow. Every change request is recorded in ServiceNow. What we've removed is the need for humans to go in and actually ask for a change request in the ServiceNow UI. We use the ServiceNow APIs very heavily. We use Azure DevOps, and we get Azure DevOps to effectively raise, approve, and complete the changes. We have had regulatory audits on this. It is all good. But yes, we absolutely need to be super careful about that. We do still use ServiceNow. It is still ultimately the point of evidence and audit for regulatory compliance, but just heavy degrees of automation and integration for that.
So where are the evidence actually generated in the GitOps pipeline or in
the pipeline? Yes,
in
exactly.
the pipeline? Okay.
Thank you. Any more questions? Okay, then thank you very much, Simon.
Thank you
and
so
give
much.
him a round of applause.